And the nationalist leaders like Dadabhai Naroji, Ranade, Arsidat, they have also started criticizing the economic exploitation which was unleashed by the British rule. And they argued that the main reason of poverty during British time was economic exploitation by foreigners. So if we want to alleviate poverty, solve the problems of poverty, the main thing is that we must fight out the foreign rule. In 18, so far as the freedom struggle is concerned, Indian National Congress probably has the most vital role. In 1885, Indian National Congress was formed. You know, it was mostly because of the initiative of Alan Octavian Hume. And the Indian National Congress in 1885, it was founded with a very modest constitutionalist outlook. And initially, they have never pursued any violent tactics or strategy. Rather, they were believing in petitions, persuasions, rather than in agitation or any violent reactions. So the earliest plea that it made to the government was for the facilitation of the Indian access to the Indian civil service, so that gradually Indian people can have a say in administration. Present day IAS was not there. The predecessor of this IAS, present day IAS, was ICS, Indian Civil Service. And also it was that Indians, they have aspired to join this civil service and to have a place in administration. In 1895, Dr. Annie Besant founded Indian Home Rule League. And Annie Besant, he was also leader of the Indian National Congress, drafted a constitution of India bill, envisaging a constitution which guaranteed every citizen freedom of expression, then inviolability of one's house, right to property, equality before the law, and at a special session in Bombay in 1918, on the Montagu-Chelmsford report, the Congress demanded that the new Government of India Act contain a declaration of the rights of Indians. Among other things, rights must be granted. Motilal Nehru Committee report also came out in 1928. And this very report, which is, drafted by Motilal Nehru Committee, incorporated all these demands of the Indians, like right to liberty, security of dwelling and property, freedom of conscience, right to profess and practice any religion, freedom of expression, like that. All these rights were given space. And we shall see that although all these demands, they had certain economic implications, the demands were essentially political and elitist. It was not until the appearance in the very scene, so far as the freedom struggle is concerned, the appearance of Gandhi, that the socio-economic problem of common people came to focus. So Gandhi's greatest contribution was that he brought the common people to national politics. Support had got a contribution, Gandhi. He could bring the common man to the national scene. So the common man also find a figure in national politics. So Gandhi's contribution to the freedom struggle in India was most significant. You know, in the socio-economic field, the Gandhian activities were also very much seen in the peasant revolutions. For example, the peasant movement in Champaran in Bihar, Gandhian philosophy has inspired them. And Gandhi also has initiated the strategy of Satyagraha. So when Gandhi took a very clear anti-imperialist position, he was in favor of solving class conflict within the Indian society through persuasion, because he never believed in violence. His method was non-violence, non-violent technique, Satyagraha, Ahimsa, concept of Swaraj. They are the most important concepts of Gandhian philosophy. So let me briefly also speak about Gandhi's substance of Swaraj. You know, in Lahore resolution of 1929, it is the month of December, the Congress demanded complete independence. And on January 30, 1930, in Young India, that is a journal where Gandhi laid down his perceptions of the substance of independence or substance of Swaraj. Swaraj means self-rule. Swaraj. Raj means rule, Swa means self. Then we must rule our own country. Foreigners must quit. So, in Young India, Gandhian philosophy is reflected to some of the substance of independence or substance of Swaraj. And it contains total prohibition, reduction of pound rupee exchange ratio from 1 shilling 6 pence to 1 shilling 4 pence, reduction of land revenue, abolition of salt taxes. That is why he had gone for salt satyagraha, Labana satyagraha. You must be knowing about that. Then also he demanded reduction of military expenditure by at least 50% to begin with. Then also reduction of salaries of the highest grade services. Then protective tariff on foreign goods. Passage of the coastal traffic reservation bill, and also abolition of CID, Central Intelligence Department, or its popular control. Issue of licenses to use firearms for self-defense, of course, subject to popular control. Then discharge of all political prisoners, save those condemned for murder or attempt to murder, or trial by ordinary judicial tribunals, and withdrawal of all political prosecutions. So these are the demands which are contained in this concept of complete independence and envisaged by the Lahore Resolution of Congress. There also another important resolution by All India Congress Committee AICC was the Karachi Resolution. So there are some of the important resolutions of Congress which have served as distinct stages in the freedom struggle. The Karachi Resolution was passed in 1931, and it was the first clear statement of the socio-economic contents of the freedom movement. It laid down that organization of economic life must conform to the principle of justice. The state should safeguard the interest of the workers, and it must secure for them by suitable laws, legislations, a very living wage, healthy conditions of work, limited hours of labor, suitable machinery for settling industrial disputes, and social insurances. And also in the resolution, the demand was the land tenure system should be reformed. And results must be promised on equitable adjustment of the burden on agricultural land. Then the state would protect indigenous cloth against foreign cloth. Then also, these are some of the important resolutions like Karachi Resolution or the Lahore Resolution, and significant contributions made by the Gandhian principles or Gandhian philosophy. Then also, in the freedom struggle, another important philosophy has influenced our freedom fighters, idea of socialism. Bolshevik revolution happened in 1917 in Russia, successfully. So Marxian philosophy has influenced most of the political systems of the world. But of course, very interestingly, Karl Marx's philosophy was not successfully implemented in a industrialized society of Germany, which he mostly was pleading for. Rather, socialism was successful in an agricultural economy like Russia. So Bolshevik revolution was successful in Russia. And also the very success of socialism in Russia, it has also created interest in the leaders of freedom struggle in India. It has also inspired the Indian leaders. So, in most of the urban centers, socialist leaders they have come. You know, Jawaharlal Nehru he had shown a great admiration for socialism. ଆମେ ସେଟାକୁ ମୋଷ୍ଟଲି ପପୁଲାରଲି କୁହାଯାଉଛି Nehruvian socialism, which later on it was also termed as democratic socialism, likewise. So we have not gone for a totalitarian concept of communism. Our Indian brand of socialism was something different. In Lucknow session in 1928, Jawaharlal Nehru, in his presidential address, he has announced his conviction that the only solution of the world's problem and of India's problem lies in socialism. So prominently he advocated socialism in the Lucknow session. Of course, this statement made a ideological rift within the top leadership of the Congress, and also Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel issued a statement to the effect that he had ideological differences with Nehru on matters like the nature of capitalism, but whatever it may be, idea of socialism has inspired to a great extent our national leaders, particularly after the success of Bolshevik revolution in Russia in 1917. Then another important concept is idea of planning. Idea of planning also, like socialism, gained popularity in 1934. And Nehru became the chairman of the National Planning Committee and Professor K.T. Shah as secretary. You know, in 1940, a group of industrialists led by Birla prepared what is known as the Bombay Plan. The plan envisaged the doubling of per capita income and the tripling of national income in 15 years. And towards the end of the Second World War, that is towards 1945, Emenra, a leader of the Indian Communist movement and now a radical humanist, published a people's plan. And unlike the Bombay Plan, it primarily emphasized the agriculture and advocated nationalization of land and liquidation of the rural indebtedness. And according to this people's plan of immense Raj, surplus production should be reinvested for raising employment and standard of living. So the ideas of socialism, ideas of planning, they have influenced the minds of the leaders of the freedom movement in India. You know, if we have a insight or in-depth look to the nature of Gandhian economics, Gandhi was for cottage industry. He had a great call to avoid the foreign cloth, foreign goods and all that. Swadeshi, the idea of Swadeshi, boycott foreign cloth, foreign goods, and initially opposed also class contradiction by means of his theory of trusteeship. And this theory of trusteeship, you must be knowing, very important, and change the heart of the owners to solve the problem of exploitation. Of course, towards the end of his life, he was slightly disillusioned. He could feel that to change the heart is very difficult. It's a remote possibility sometimes. But one thing he never ignored, the common man. And always he stressed the need for revival of the small scale and cottage industries. Here, let me say that Gandhi's economic thinking was a part of his broader social vision of Sarvodaya. Sarvodaya, that is upliftment of all, that everybody should develop. Sarvodaya, this idea of Sarvodaya. So, Swadeshi, Satyagraha, Sarvodaya, these are very important concepts associated with the Gandhian philosophy. And towards this same, he devoted a major part of his constructive program towards the abolition of untouchability, যেটা কি আমি অস্পৃশ্যতা নিবারণ, the upliftment of the poor, whom he called Harijans. Now, of course, Harijan word is not used, it's mostly replaced by a word called Dalit. The present day Dalit. So, though he did not present a separate economic program for them, his Pune Pact with Dr. Ambedkar gave them a political status in British India's electoral system. So, also the spinning wheel gave women an amount of economic independence. जो काटी खा कुट्टी पिंधो, cottage industry. So spinning wheel was introduced by Gandhi, and that gave the women also an amount of economic independence through their own labor. And it is Gandhi's Satyagraha which brought the women into the arena of politics and liberated them from their domestic bondage. So these are certain philosophies and trends involved in this process of national movement. And above anything else, this Indian national movement is a movement for political independence. And it had to mobilize different groups and interests. And it was necessary that contentious issues, the issues which shall create discord, which shall create differences, must be avoided because that may divide the people. So in India, there appears to have three broad aspirations for the economy of the independent India. That is a capitalist dream of an industrialized India under minimal state control and state support. And the second aspiration is a Gandhian view of basically rural and self-sufficient economy with minimal state control. Then a socialist view of an industrialized India under strong state control and leadership. So, broadly speaking, the ideological debates evolved a basic minimum consensus on the course of economic development of India. So the consensus, the common points where most of the leaders they agree that there could be no development without political freedom. Economic development is possible only when we achieve political independence, political freedom. karena ଆମକୁ ଯଦି political freedom ମିଳୁନି ଆମେ ଯେତେ ପ୍ଲାନିଂ କରୁ ବା ଯେତେ economic aspiration ରଖୁ it shall not be fulfilled. Then a certain amount of state control was necessary for the economy. Then basic natural resources should be nationalized. There was also an opinion that jamidari and other intermediary rights in agricultural land should be abolished. These are the broad areas where consensus was there, that there could not be any development possible without political freedom. So political freedom is the basic need. And certain amount of state control is required. I mean, state control को पूरा पूरी abolish कर परिवार नहीं. It was necessary for a streamlined economy. Basic natural resources should be nationalized. And there is also an overwhelming opinion that jamindari and other intermediary rights in agricultural lands should be abolished. And this basic consensus means for every leader of national freedom movement, they agree. And it was also reflected in Congress manifesto, in the provincial assembly elections in 1946. And in the manifesto of the Congress party, promised to encourage and to modernize and to rapidly extend the industry, agriculture, social service, public utilities. And for this purpose, so the manifesto said that it will be necessary to plan and coordinate social advance in all its many fields to prevent the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of individuals and groups. To prevent vested interests inimically to society from growing and to have social control of the mineral sources. It means of transport and the principal means of production and distribution of land, industry, and in other departments of national activity. So it was necessary that the state must have certain control. It must control the key and basic industries and services, mineral resources, railways, waterways, shipping, and other means of public transport. So in this process, in spite of our socialistic aspirations, in spite of the fact that our leaders also have been greatly influenced by the Bolshevik Revolution or the successful revolution of Russia in 1917, but state capitalism in India also Gradually, it has ushered in. So we find that in this chapter, Indian national movement had a legacy of political and economic protest, and also the national leaders like Naroji, Renade, R.C. Dutt, they have strongly criticized the colonial rule, and with the appearance of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi on political scenario, the cause of the common man was taken up. Because Gandhiଙ୍କର ସବୁଠୁ ବଡ଼ contribution ହେଲା, he brought the common man to the center of Indian politics. And he has protected the interest of the common masses. Then let us go for the second unit where we should discuss about various models of development. We have gone for a democracy, but after we establish democracy, essential prerequisite necessities that we must have an ideal model of development. Because formulation and implementation of the policy, they depend heavily on the models of development you are going to pursue. जे आम कि प्रकार उन्नयन बा विकास को प्रकार मॉडल को आम एक्सेप्ट करूचे परस्यू करूचे. So there is a lot of ideological debate that what type of models we should pursue. And this debate over development was complicated by political and economic problems arising out of the Second World War, and also because of the partition of our country. The question of control over food supply, which had been imposed during the war, became critical for a country. And Gandhi opposed control on moral ground as it enhanced corruption and control was abolished. And consequently, the food prices rose steeply. And again, the state control has to be reimposed. So there are confusing overlaps. And three broad streams of thinking mentioned above were not clearly demarcated from each other. And no Indian political leader was more committed to the poorest of the poor than Gandhi. As I have repeatedly told you, it is Gandhi who has brought the common man to importance. And no other leader they have thought in terms of the interest for the rest of the poor. It is only Gandhi who thought of that by that time. And this placed him very close to the socialist thinking. Of course, many Indian capitalists they have opposed Gandhi, they have rejected Gandhian idea of small and cottage industries because they argued that Gandhi's idea of cottage industry or Swadeshi might be temporarily accommodated, but it cannot give a permanent solution. Then another debate, another dimension of this debate concerned the traditional socialist policy of nationalization, which had been implemented in USSR. Because USSR after the Bolshevik Revolution has gone for nationalization, because that is a very important socialist measure. Indian capitalists naturally did not like nationalization, trade unionism, and also state support to the cause of the labor, because they want to monopolize industries and other fields of economy. But Gandhi supported trade unionism as long as it worked in amity with the owners of industries, because it is only trade unions which would safeguard the interest of the workers. And socialist doctrine was based on class contradiction. So this made it possible for the industrial capitalists of India to use Gandhi's name in aid of that position. And also there is a debate on land policy. You know, there is a question of land reforms on which the broadest consensus was obtained. In Bombay plan, which we have discussed just a few minutes before, the big industrialists of India envisaged land reforms. And in December 1946, the Subcommittee on Land Reforms of the National Planning Committee of the Congress, which was headed by J.C. Kumarappa, which is staunch Gandhian, he laid down three stages of land reform: abolition of zamindari, and also abolition of other intermediary bodies. And it has advocated for the grant of the right to the actual, right of tenancy right to the actual cultivator. So in the process, the jamidars, the intermediary bodies, they lost their importance. Their rights were sealed. During the discussion in the Constituent Assembly of India, this issue was also acquired a lot of importance. In 1947, I don't know, actually 1946 49 ଭିତରେ ଆମର Constituent Assembly ତିଆରି ହେଲା. The task before the Constituent Assembly is to frame the constitution for independent India, free India, taking up all these social problems, economic problems, political issues, which have come up in the wake of nationalist struggle. So in May 1947, Raja Jagannath Bhagat Singh moved an amendment to the draft of the constitution. Draft article on the right to the property, which allowed acquisition of private property by the state for public purpose. So private property can be acquired by the state for public purpose. Please remember. And this move was made by Jagannath Bhagat Singh, and public purpose was to be substituted against compensation, inserting the word just before compensation. But Patel rejected this amendment. Compensation, that just compensation बात रहा है. Suppose state is taking certain property of an individual, but just compensation must be given. But Vallabhbhai Patel rejected this amendment proposal, making it clear that Zamindars and some of their representatives could not fund the program of land reform in that way. So the process of acquisition is already there, and the legislatures are already taking out steps to liquidate the Zamindari system, and this was the way in which Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel argued, and the move made by Raja Jagannath Bhagat Singh was rejected by Patel. Then another important thing, the system of control. The system of control and ration and food supply had been necessary during World War, Second World War, I mean to say. In January 1944, in Eastern Economist, I mean the journal, it was suggested and advocated for a progressive strengthening of the present system of controls in scope and character, so that not only made strengthen the smooth transition to peace economy, but also become the instrument of long-term economic planning for our country. And that year, that is the year 1944, in the latter part of the year, I mean, very much close to this remarks made in the Eastern Economist in 1944, almost with the in the similar, I mean, at the same time, Commodity Prices Board, which was consisting of a noted economist, A.D. Garwal Committee report आपने सुनी है, and also D.R. Gadigal formula विषय भी हमें आपको जानते हैं. They were the members of this Commodity Price Board. This board was appointed, and it submitted a report in the same year, that is 1944, recommending not abolition but the improvement of the system of control. That was the approach of the Price Commodity Board in the same year, in the, that is the early part of 1944. And another important also issue with the system of control is issue of nationalization. Indian businessmen, industrialists were very much alarmed so far as nationalization is concerned. Because nationalization there shall be more of state control. Private economy shall be shrinking. Their profit motive shall be affected. So, Indian businessmen were alarmed at the talk of nationalization, which emanates from the socialists and left radicals. Because socialization पे वैसे demand को मैंने करते socialist leaders. that there must be nationalization. There should be state control. State विभिन्न इंडस्ट्री की हो बिजनेस को निजर अख्तियार को आनिबो. And also in 1946 the Eastern economists declared, we reject unreservedly the Soviet ideal of complete and immediate socialization of the whole range of the economy. Naturally जे आमे immediately गोटे रशियन पैटर्न ऑफ सोशलिज्म जाई परबे. At the 20th annual session of the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, they had to assure the businessmen it is wrong to imagine that this government is out to injure industry. नेहरू सेमानकु आश्योर कले बिजनेसमैन बा इंडस्ट्रीज मान बुझे नाइ नाइ स्टेट आपण मानकर को एते क्षति पहुंचेबनी. इट इज नॉट गोइंग टू हार्म यू, injure you, and if we will do that, that will be big folly on our part. आमे जदी nationalization नारे सेमानकु अति संकुचित करिबा, then that will be a big mistake on our part. So Nehru assured that we are not, or the state is not going to do any harm to them. We want to provide facilities for industry, facilities for production, technical, scientific, and power resources, and all that. Then also there is issue of planning. Very briefly, we are touching upon certain issues involved in this process of development model. Depend on land policy, system of control, issue of nationalization, then also issue of planning. Though there was a general welcome to the idea of planning among all sections of the society, the ideas about the character and the nature of plan varied. Indian businessmen, as we have seen, they have rejected the Soviet type or Russian type of planning. So, Soviet USSR जो planning था, है ना, Bolshevik revolution successful होला पर Marxist ideology was spanning high. But our businessmen, they were rejecting the Soviet type of planning and welcomed a vague system of state guidance. Rather, they also sometimes advocate for a state role in expansion of the basic and heavy industries. But socialist or left radical man state role को बेसी हाई टू करेले. No, role of the state should be more stringent, more pivotal in planning. And state must guide the national economic activities. That was the version of the socialist and left radicals. So it is believed that Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was sympathetic to the first view. And Nehru to the second view. That Vallabhbhai Patel for the Soviet type of planning, but Nehru thought in terms of also states' positive role in expansion of industries. So Patel is believed to have strongly resisted the establishment of a planning commission by government, which he thought would reflect the Soviet Union's economic ideology. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Soviet economic ideology ଉପରେ ବିଶେଷ ବିଶ୍ୱାସ କରୁନଥିଲେ. He was rather very critical about it. Then What about the industrial relations? It was at the trade union front there is the largest conflict. We have a very powerful trade union by that time. AITUC, you must have heard, All India Trade Union Congress. It was set up in 1920 during that, pre-British, during the time of British rule. And AITUC, All India Trade Union Congress, was formed at the instance of the International Labour Organization, ILO. And congressmen, they have distanced themselves from this. So they joined AITUC only after the Goa session of All India Congress Committee in 1922. Ahmedabad Textile Workers Union, in the industrial belt, this trade unionism has grown. Bombay, Ahmedabad, in Calcutta, jute mill workers. So workers union, they have come up in these industrialized belts, particularly Bombay, Gujarat, Kolkata, Calcutta, this Bombay presidency, Calcutta presidency, where there are many mills, cotton mills in Maharashtra belt, jute mills in Calcutta belt. Ahmedabad Textile Workers Union was directly patronized by Gandhi, and they never joined AITUC. And as a result, All India Trade Union Congress was under strong influence of the communists and socialists. You know, AITUC, All India Trade Union Congress, was dominated by the socialist leaders. But Ahmedabad Textile Worker Union was directly patronized by Gandhi, and they have never joined AITUC. So virtually in the field of trade union, there is a lot of differences, lot of conflict. And the difference were aggravated by mainly two factors, two reasons. In 1942, the Communist Party had opposed the Quit India movement. Please remember, very important. Communist Party, যেটা কি ভারত ছাড় আন্দোলন in 1942, it was opposing. On which ground the communist members of All India Congress Committee were expelled. And second is, after the Second World War, communist militancy in the labor front increased greatly. So, in view of this smooth transfer of power that was accompanied by the smooth transfer of several British industries to Indian hands, this labor militancy was disliked by the Congress leadership. In 1947, Hindustan Mazdoor Sevak Sangh was set up with the Ahmedabad Textile Workers Union as the nucleus. And in view of the Sangh's failure to gather strength, in May 1947, the top leaders of Congress met in New Delhi at a high-level conference under the leadership of Patel and decided to have a separate labor organization. And as a result, Indian National Trade Union Congress was set up, INTUC. All India TUC, AITUC through अलगा है कि ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ସଂସ୍ଥା ବଲ୍ଲଭଭାଇ ପଟେଲଙ୍କର ଲିଡରସିପରେ ତିଆରି କରାଗଲା, that is INTUC, that is Indian National Trade Union Congress. So at the time of transfer of power, and जो समय India is at the brink of getting independence and transferring power from the British to the Indian hands. So at that time of transfer of power, when Indian capitalism was coming to its own, therefore the issue of class contradiction acquired sharpness and it naturally affected industrial relations. କାରଣ କ୍ୟାପିଟାଲିଷ୍ଟ ମାନଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଗୋଟେ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ସ୍ପିୟରରେ ପିସ୍ ଇଜ ରିକ୍ୱାର୍ଡ ଫର ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ଡେଭଲପମେଣ୍ଟ ଏବଂ ସେ ସମୟରେ ଯଦି ଟ୍ରେଡ୍ ୟୁନିୟନ ଆକ୍ଟିଭିଟି ଗୁଡାକ ବେଶୀ ପ୍ରମିନେଣ୍ଟ ହବ ବେଶୀ ମିଲିଟାଣ୍ଟ ହବ naturally industrialists shall be affected. So they don't like that the trade union activities or this type of workers union must come up because that will be inimical to industrial peace. So since independence, the communists and socialists wanted that the class relations within the economy to be immediately settled. So this is regarding the emergence of various trade unions and regarding industrial relationship. Because in the industrial sphere also a peaceful atmosphere was expected by the industrialists. Then the ideological debate also had its impact on politics. ये जो ideological difference का मध्य political sphere reflected है at the time of or around that period of independence. The past post-war budget was inflationary, and to counteract the inflationary tendencies the national of the economy, the finance minister of the interim government, Liaquat Ali Khan, he presented a budget which proposed a 25% tax on all business profits above 100,000 rupees. But this budget practically sealed the fate of the Congress League cooperation and was one of the major factors leading to the partition of the country. On the eve of independence in June 1947, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of India concluded that though the forces of freedom movement had compelled the imperial rulers to open negotiations with the Indian leaders, they were trying, the British rulers, they were trying to forge a new alliance with the princes, big landlords, and big businessmen of India. And by that way, the Britishers wanted that they can still have the control over the Indian state and economy. In 1947, the forward bloc left the Congress. The Congress Socialist Party decided to drop the word Congress from its name. And Ram Manohar Lohia, a socialist leader, accused the Congress of compromising with the vested interest groups. Ram Manohar Lohia accused Congress that the Congress leaders, they're there in connivance with the vested interest groups. So the Congress Socialist Party decided to drop this word Congress. In March, the party opened the membership to non-congressmen. And the party's legislative assembly members in UP who had been elected to Congress virtually they are fighting on Congress tickets. and they sought re-election. Of course, they were defeated. So around this period of independence, there are sharp ideological debates on the future course of India's development. Another important discussion should be there on the objectives resolution, because you are all students of Indian Constitution. In the Constituent Assembly, Nehru has moved this objectives resolution, because all these issues which we have discussed, they are sought to be sorted out in objectives resolution, which was passed in India in a fairly early stage of its proceedings. This resolution was brought by Nehru. That resolution, that's called objectives resolution. When जो resolution रे objectives are placed, that what should be the objectives of our independent India, and this should also guarantee to all people of India, that is justice, social, economic, and political, equality of status of opportunity, and before the law, freedom of thought, expression, belief, worship, vocation, association. You know, these objectives are reflected in our preamble, जोटा कि हमें मध्य coming chapter में पढ़िबा. Objectives resolution contain the objectives for free India. That what are the promises to be made before the people of free India? And there are, in this objectives resolution, liberal and welfareist ideas, and they are reflected in the preamble of our country. So, virtually the objectives resolution, which was moved by Jawaharlal Nehru in the Constituent Assembly, has contained the basic philosophy on which our Constitution was framed. And also in the preamble, we have made before the people of free India very clear that our Constitution stands for justice, social, economic, and political. It stands for liberty and fraternity, secular and socialistic ideas, and all that which we shall gradually know. Constitution of our country is the highest legal document. कारण आपण जानते विभिन्न प्रकार laws अच्छी, किंतु highest law of the land is called the Constitution. It may be in the written form or it may be in unwritten form, but ours is a written document, and it's the largest constitution of the world, the highest document. So, the constitution of the country embodies the statement of rights of the people as lawfully established. In a general sense, it lays down the structure of power and the obligation of the ruler towards the ruled. Because after independence, we have gone for a democratic setup. That what should be the responsibilities of the people, and also what should be the responsibility of the ruler towards the people. They are all clearly indicated. A significant point about our Constitution is that it is future oriented. In the 18th century, when the first written constitution in the world was appeared, it has appeared. You know what the first written constitution you must be knowing? It is the Constitution of America. In 18th century, 1776, semanଙ୍କର war of independence ହେଲା, 1789 ରେ Philadelphia Convention. ଆମର ଯେନ୍ Constituent Assembly Their Philadelphia Convention has framed the Constitution for America. And it was the first federal structure also. But we have gone for a written constitution like America. But we have not adopted the presidential form of government. We have gone for a parliamentarian form of government like Britain, like the British people. In 20th century, the view of rights, it was considerably widened by welfare and even socialist approach. New types of rights have come up. So the Constitution of India also has thought in terms of a very, a separate and a clear-cut chapter on the fundamental rights. If we go for the opening pages, the first one is the preamble of the Constitution. Prakatharam. And significance of the preamble of our Constitution is that it is like a mirror. When you stand before the mirror, your totality is reflected. Likewise, it's like a mirror reflecting the ideologies on which, or the basic principles on which the Constitution stands. And there are a lot of debates that whether Constitution is a part of the Constitution or not. ଧରନ୍ତୁ ଆମେ ଗୋଟେ ବହିର ପ୍ରିଫେସ୍ ପଢୁଛେ, ମାନେ କହିବେ ଯେ preface is not a part and parcel of the book, but it is important because in order to understand the book, preface works as a key. କାରଣ ମୁଖବନ୍ଧରେ ଗୋଟେ ରାଇଟର ସେ ବହିର ଥୀମ୍ ଟାକୁ ରିଫ୍ଲେକ୍ଟ କରିଥାଏ. Preamble is almost like a preface, but it's the essential key through which you can open up the Constitution. से चाबिकाठीरे आमे संविधान को खोली पाबा. So the preamble, if not one part and parcel of the Constitution, but it's a very important reflection of the Constitution or the ideology of the Constitution. And in the preamble, it is the opening was that we, the people of India. It means that this Constitution is prepared by us. We do hereby adopt, enact, and give this Constitution to ourselves. Upon the preamble of this complex sentence, it's a single sentence, starting from we, the people of India, ending in do hereby adopt, enact, and give this Constitution to ourselves. That means Constitution of India is prepared and framed by the people, by popular sovereignty. That we are our masters. Our democratic aspirations, they are reflected. And also, India has been declared a democratic sovereign country, a republic, a socialist republic. In 42nd Amendment, word secular and socialist, they are also used. They have been originally nothila kintu pare amendment start kartila. So ours is a democratic country, it's a republic, it's a socialist country, it's a secular country. So I mean preamble to kam padhile nature of our polity bisare jani pariba, that what is the nature of our polity. So if we go through the preamble of the Constitution, Again, we can say that it promises to the citizens justice, social, economic and political. ଆପଣ ଦେଖନ୍ତୁ ତିନି ପ୍ରକାର ନ୍ୟାୟ ଆମେ ପାଇବା, social, economic and political. ତେଣୁ ଆମେ ଯଦି ମେନ୍ କନଷ୍ଟିଟ୍ୟୁସନ ବଡିକି ଯିବା, chapter 3 that is on fundamental rights gives us political justice. It is a chapter speaking, expressing the political rights, the political justice of the people. But the next chapter, that is chapter 4 on directive principle of state policy, grants the India's social and economic rights. And also our constitution promises its citizens liberty of thought and expression, belief, faith, worship, equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual. So when you analyze and dissect the single complex sentence that is the preamble, so interestingly, you shall find in that single sentence the total sum and substance of the constitution is reflected. जे आमर संविधान कौन पे तैयारी है, ऑब्जेक्टिव्स कौन, लोकमान की कौन कौन प्रदान करो, all these things have been enumerated. So preamble, whether it's a necessary part of the constitution or not, this type of discussions are having no meaning, because that is like a preface of the book, serves as a key to the constitution, because by applying that key we can go through the meaning and significance of the Constitution of India. So it has also given us rights, fundamental rights for that matter. There are two kinds of rights in our Indian Constitution. In chapter 3, मौलिक अधिकार उपरे जो चैप्टर का डील करूची, हम यदि ताको ओपन अप करिबा, that some of the rights are granted to all persons and some are granted to the citizens. Suppose political rights, for example, right to vote, it is only granted to the Indian citizens, not that a foreigner enjoys that. But think of right to life, it is granted to all the citizens, all the people, those who are residing in the country. So the first kind of rights which is available to all the persons, they are also available to the non-citizens, which can include equality before law, equal protection of law, that is Article 14. Protection against unlawful conviction, that is Article 20. Life and personal liberty, Article 21. Protection against unlawful detention, Article 22. Right against exploitation in form of traffic in human beings and forced labor, except for public purpose, that is Article 23. Then the right of children against hazardous employment, Article 24. Likewise, so there is also a lot of discussion about the nature of rights. Some scholars argue that the fundamental rights guaranteed in the Constitution are negative in nature. And many rights are against the state. Some of them, like the right against untouchability, the right to protection of minorities, and while most of the rights are also granted to the individual, some of the rights are also granted to groups. Individual, some of the rights also are granted to the groups. So fundamental rights definitely the strongest pillar on which the democratic rights of the Indians are safeguarded. And if the fundamental rights are encroached by the state authority by any law, the individual can move to the court of law under Article 32, which is known as right to constitutional remedies. So Article 32 protects other rights also. It is itself a fundamental right, but safeguarding other rights. Of course, there are certain situations where fundamental rights for a limited period can be suspended. For example, when there is national emergency, when country is confronted with grave national dangers, there is a period when fundamental rights are suspended, and one individual cannot move to the court of law to protect it. Then the other chapter is directive principle of state policy, which speaks in terms of social and economic justice. देखो तो political justice जोटा कि preamble रे कहा है justice social, economic and political. Political justice is granted under fundamental rights and under directive principle of state policy. Social and economic justice has been granted. And you know, these are positive directions of the state. Fundamental rights are enforceable. Directive principles are not enforceable, but still then they are important. You know, welfare state must strive to implement those directives. এবং ଆମେ ଦେଖିବା ଅନେକ ଟେକ୍ସଟ ମାନଙ୍କରେ ଆପଣ ବି ପଢିଥିବେ, they have categorized these directives as there are certain liberal principles, there are certain socialistic principles, there is also some Gandhian principle which are very much given space and place in this directive chapter of directive principle of state policy. And the most fundamental directive to the state is to strive to secure social order in which justice, social, economic, and political shall be informing all the institutions of the national life. And the state shall in particular strive to minimize inequalities in income and eliminate inequalities of status, facilities, and opportunities. So by that way, a socialistic pattern of society can be established, and the economic gap between individuals can be minimized. And most of the articles in this directive principle, that is chapter 4, they are elaborations of these basic objectives. The state shall take steps to organize village panchayats and endow them with such powers and authority as may be necessary to enable them to function as units of self-government. And panchayat raj system ro dekhibe essential basic to sabi amit roji Gandhian principles, establishment of panchayat raj, cottage improvement of the cottage industry, etc. There is more guarded promise in the economic sphere, and the state shall, within the limits of its economic capacity, make effective provisions for securing the right to work, right to education, right to public assistance, old age, sickness, and disablement, and in other cases of undeserved want. The system of social insurance is also provided. And welfare measures से जहाँ जहाँ दरकार से provision उड़ा देखिए directive principle of state policy रखी. And state must sincerely strive to establish them. कारण directive टाको यदि implement न करे, कोटे individual state को against कौन सी मामला रुजू करी पारिबोनी. The state cannot be tried on that basis. But on moral grounds, the state must strive hard to implement those things. So they are not enforceable by the court of law. But the community's consciousness is the greatest guard. The public awareness is the greatest guard. So any welfare state because India is striving towards welfare, to establish the welfare state. Directive principles have assumed more of primacy of importance. Rights for the workers, rights for children, rights for weaker sections, and also in the sphere of agriculture and environment. I mean, protection of environment. All these provisions are very much there in directive principle of social policy. ଆପଣ ଦେଖିବେ ଯଦି ସେପାରେଟଲି ଆପଣ ଫଣ୍ଡାମେଣ୍ଟାଲ ରାଇଟ୍ସ ଆଉ ଡିରେକ୍ଟିଭ ପ୍ରିନ୍ସିପଲ ଚାପ୍ଟର ଗୁଡାକ କଣ ଟେକ୍ସଟ ପଢିବେ very interesting. You can go for the particularistic provisions. So in this chapter, more or less we have covered and focused on the developmental aspiration of the national movement, which are embodied in the Constitution of India, which is the highest law of the land, and the importance of preamble, importance of the chapter on fundamental rights, importance of the chapter on directive principle of state policy, we have already discussed. The DPSP chapter ta directive ta ଆପଣ ଦେଖିए very interestingly बहुत text मान के लिखा है the directive principle of state policy, even though not enforceable by code of law, that become more fundamental than fundamental rights. Very interestingly, because states cannot ignore them. And सेटा social और economic justice की establish करियो society. Then let us come to the discussions on diversity and pluralism. We can say the democracy in India, in a very significant way, it was figured in the form of colonial legacy. Because the Britishers, they have introduced representative legislative bodies. Even though the grant of the voting rights, it was limited in nature, the sheer number of voters, that is 40 million, was the second largest in the non-communist world at that time, at the time of independence. And the groups were accorded political representation, which are identified as religious communities with their own immutable interests and collective rights. So what do we understand by democracy in political theory? Democracy has increasingly been viewed as a form of good governance, which paves the way for arriving at decisions among a group of individuals organized as a polity. And the essential value of democracy lies in its moral superiority over any other way of arriving at decisions which take every citizen's interest into account and which are equally binding on everyone. We know that democracy doesn't mean unanimity. Decision making and unanimity, it is a very remote thing. And due to the large and complex societies, it is not possible to gather together to make decisions on every issue. The ancient state, city state, जो एथेंस आपने पढ़ते direct democracy. समरे consensus तो का मानी पड़ती. Population has very few. Direct democracy, being some decisions were taken by simply yes or no, or by raising of the hands. But you think of the large democracies in the modern states, very complex. consensus, to arrive at consensus is a very remote possibility. So if we see the democracy purely as a set of institutions which encompasses free and fair election, democracy of hame kaun puche? Free and fair election, legislative assemblies, general legal frameworks and constitutional governments. Then, in that light, we are essentially privileging the procedural form of democracy. And if we have an idea of a democracy being people by truly equal citizens who are politically engaged, tolerant of different opinions, ways of life, they have an equal voice in choosing their rulers, holding them accountable, then we are privileging the substantive notion of democracy. So you must have some idea of procedural democracy and substantive form of democracy. So it follows that in a limited proceduralist view of democracy, the level of electoral participation then I procedure upare beshi importance doche. Election, for example, it is a procedure of establishing the people's voice. So frequency of elections, peaceful change in political power, they are taken to be indicators. So this is what is called a proceduralist view of democracy. But many critics of this procedural democracy say that it is endangered by the fallacy of electoralism. Because social and economic inequalities involving the ethno-cultural communities, including minorities and women like that, make it difficult for them to participate effectively. Procedural democracy is प्रत्येक section of the society ସବୁ ଲୋକମାନେ equally participate କରିପାରୁଛନ୍ତି. Most of the times the proceduralistic democracy ignored the interest of these minorities. Think of the rights of the minorities, of the rights of women like that. Those who advocate for the substantive form of democracy, on the other hand, they argue that democratic project is incomplete until the meaningful exercise of the equal rights of citizenship, and they have been guaranteed to all. On this account, free and fair elections, freedom of speech and expression, the rule of law, and its protection to all are necessary, but by no means sufficient conditions for democracy. Procedural democracy जिनसे पर भी emphasize करा होची धरंतु election कोंतु rule of law कोंतु freedom of speech and expression कोंतु, they are necessary, they are required, but the thing is that they are not sufficient conditions for democracy to be meaningful. So the very idea of democracy is not accomplished by merely achieving legal and political equality. It may be severely restricted by inequalities also. So the experts have made the economic policy making insulated from the democratic process. In the contemporary post-industrial societies, the concentration of expert knowledge symbolized by the increasing influence of public policy specialists over government policy. And public opinion is another limitation. So these are two views of democracy having their own merits and also having their own limitations. The procedural view of democracy and the substantive view of democracy. Another thing is that democracy development. We have entered into an era of globalization post 1990s period. And globalization is characterized by an upsurge of market economy and political democracy. And these are both considered as virtue and also necessity. Whether it is in the Eastern European post-communistic societies or in the post-colonial Asian, African, and Latin American societies, they're all considered necessity as necessities. The theorists of political economy, like Deepak Nair, they have drawn attention to the fact that there has always been an inherent tension between the economics of markets and politics of democracy. And it is explained in terms of the exclusionary nature of markets as against the inclusionary nature of democracy. Democracy has one inclusionary nature and market has one exclusionary nature. Market excludes, democracy includes. And there is a notion of majoritarian democracy. Present modern theories ଭିତରେ ଆପଣ ଦେଖିବେ ଏଇ କନସେପ୍ଟଟା ବେଶୀ importance ପାଇଲା. Otherwise, in the traditional theories on democracy, we are not concerned about this. But now, in the present analysis of the present trends of democracy, have come up with this idea. For example, the majoritarian democracy is now preferable to monarchies or oligarchies. But it was a traditional idea. Now it has been questioned. ଆଗରୁ ଆମେ democracy ପଢ଼ାରେ ଭାବୁଥିଲେ ଯେ majoritarian democracy is to be preferred over oligarchies. It is preferred over monarchies. So monarchies should be removed, oligarchies should be removed, and there should be majoritarian democracy. Means democracy of the majoritarian people. But now it is questioned on the basis that democracy may lead to the tyranny of majority. ତାର ଅର୍ଥ ମେଜରିଟି ମାନଙ୍କର ଟିରାନିଟାକୁ ଏଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଲିଶ କରୁଛି. ଆପଣ ଦେଖନ୍ତୁ ନୂଆ ଟାଇପ୍ ଅଫ୍ ଇଣ୍ଟରପ୍ରିଟେସନ. ଆଗରୁ ଆମେ traditional theories of democracy simply discarded oligarchies or the monarchies. But now it's questioned the present day democracy is nothing but the tyranny of the majority over minority. And at the same time, the argument that the markets protect the interest of the individual and minorities is limited. So it has been argued that the markets are indeed the tyranny of minorities. Now in market, people vote with their money. Whereas in political democracy, everyone has equal vote. So what does it establish? That means there is always an inherent tension between market and democracy. Because the market, in the market, people vote with their money. But in political democracy, everyone has equal vote. We must understand that the markets tend to exclude people as consumers. ଆମେ ଯୋଉ ପ୍ରଥମେ କହିଥିଲେ ମାର୍କେଟର ସବୁବେଳେ ଗୋଟେ ଏକ୍ସକ୍ଲୁଜନାରୀ ନେଚର, ସେ ଏକ୍ସକ୍ଲୁଡ କରିବ. They tend to exclude whom? The people as consumers. If they do not have any income or sufficient income, like ଅମର୍ତ୍ୟ ସେ କହୁଛନ୍ତି entitlements. ମୋ ପାଖରେ ଯଦି ମନି ନାହିଁ, financial resource ନାହିଁ, market shall reject me. Because in the market, people vote with money. Otherwise, I shall be discarded. I shall be excluded by the market. So, markets have a tendency to exclude the people as consumers. And markets also exclude the people as producers or sellers if they have neither assets nor capabilities. Very interesting analysis. Moreover, the people, those who are devoid of entitlements, assets, or capabilities, they would not have the resource to claim or the power to assert their rights. So we may conclude this discussion like this, as Mirza Gopal Joyal, he has concluded that in this cruelly Schumpeterian political world, there is an almost complete disengagement between the lives and aspiration of the ordinary men and women on the other hand, and the world of important national issues often revolving around the interest of the advantaged ones on the other. So it follows that in the society, economic stratification is inevitable in the market economy, which systematically integrate some and marginalize others to distribute the benefits of economic growth in ways that include a few and exclude others. एई प्रकार सिचुएशन रे the institutional arrangements that mediate between the economic development on the one hand and the social development on the other, it becomes very critical. Otherwise, the economic growth would lead to regional unevenness and class inequality. So, what should be, if this is democracy and development, what is the position of democracy and development in the post-colonial societies like India? Democracies in the post-colonial societies, they have been distinct from the Western counterparts. Colonialism distorted the social and economic and political structures, thus making them very unique. So the theoretical tools developed for the advanced capitalist societies cannot be transposed simply to these post-colonial societies. In Western society, institution को हमें ओवर इम्पोज करि परिबा नहीं, हमें तंको ट्रांसपोज करि परिबा नहीं post-colonial societies पाखरे, because colonialism has already destroyed the social, economic, and political structures of post-colonial societies. That explains that ongoing debates in democratic theory concerning the new democracies, most significant among these are the debates on democracy and development, democracy and diversity, democracy, state and civil society. Thus, there has been a debate as to whether democracy and development are compatible in post-colonial societies. And so, debate चलती है post-colonial society माने करे democracy और development ये माने compatible partners की नहीं. During a period 1947 to 1967, 20 years, what was the picture of political democracy and economic development in India? In the first years of independence, the strategy of economic development was shaped by a political consensus. कारण से समय Nehruvian model was dominant. Nehru Mohanlal model. Congress accommodated the poor people under the slogan of socialism. because we have already touched upon Bombay Plan in 1944. This Nehruvian socialism, it has been articulated. And also new industrial policy resolution was taken up in 1948. Juta Kohli, Nehru Mahalanobis strategy. So democracy came to India neither as a response to an absolute state nor as the realization of an individual conception of society. The anti-colonial struggle in India was based more on the demand for an autonomous space for the nation than about individual freedom. Gandhian notion of a just state was premised on the idea that the collective interest must take precedence over individual interests. So, in such a situation, the state had an important role to play, the role of a mediator. Mediator between whom? The mediator between the political democracy and economic democracy. As the colonial past and the nationalist present shaped the strategy of economic development, conscious efforts are made to limit the degree of openness and of integration with the world economy in pursuit of a more autonomous development. So, what were the objectives? They were to catch up with the industrialized world and to improve the living conditions of the people. It was believed that primacy of the market mechanism would lead to excess consumption by the rich and underinvestment in sectors critical for development. So the main inputs were the lead role of the public investment, industrialization based on import substitution, the emphasis on the capital goods sector, industrial licensing to guide the investment in private sector, relative neglect of the agriculture, more emphasis on heavy industries than the traditionally small and cottage industries. And due to the legacy of leading an anti-colonial struggle based on the core principles of nationalism and development, Congress became the ruling dominant party. And there was a political consensus that industrialization meant development and national interest was to be equated with the people's interest. So, in sociological terms, it was thought very much under the influence of the post-war Western liberal modernization, political development theory, that modernization would reduce the linguistic diversities, secularism would do away with the religious identities, and affirmative actions would make caste gradually vanish or wither away. And thus, in India, the ideal of social democracy and the idea of a welfare state, along with the non-capitalist path to development, seemed achievable. Then let us go to a period 1967 to 1990. You know, The consensus about the nature of democracy and development, it was broken as certain qualitative changes took place in the interaction or relationship between democracy and economics of welfareism. The social groups who were on the margin of the society and were lying dormant became empowered with political voice. They now start making economic claims on the state. And why this discontent voice? The voice which have started raising protests. It was due to the non-fulfillment of the promises and expectations, because there is a rise of level of poverty. ଲୋକଙ୍କର ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କର aspiration ବା ତାଙ୍କର ଯୋଉ ଆକାଂକ୍ଷା ଥିଲା that are vitiated. Crisis in the economy in the mid 1960s, it was evident in form of food crisis, and it then became a basket case, having a ship-to-mouth existence. So the devaluation of rupee followed. Planning was to be suspended for 3 years as industrial sector as well as savings and investments they suffered. During this period, 1967 to 1990, there was also the rise of dominant caste, rich peasantry like Jat, Kamaj, Kapus, Jadavs, Reddys, in the face of decline of semi-feudal landlords. And these castes, they have deserted Congress, they have left Congress to join and to create opposition parties. The response of the state was in the form of a strong new emphasis on agriculture in the form of Green Revolution. As for achieving food security, betting the strong policy was adopted, and under the policy, the better endowed peasants and regions received extensive support. Though land reform measures that had received partial success, with the notable exceptions of the states like Kerala, West Bengal, Maharashtra, Jammu and Kashmir, they are now not pursued. The poverty alleviation programs like DPAP or DWRK, they are launched. So, in the absence of serious program efforts, the Congress, under the leadership of Indira Gandhi, increasingly resorted to populist theories in the form of slogans: nationalization of banks, abolition of privy purse. You must be knowing that during that period, this nationalization, bank nationalization, privy purse abolition, these policies they haven't taken up. Political democracy had provided the institutional mechanisms to sustain the ruling coalition. Lack of institutional mechanisms set in the crisis eventually. And after 1991, India has witnessed an absence of consensus regarding the strategy of economic development. The long-term vision of political leadership of Nehru, it has been replaced by short-term strategies at the adoption of the new economic policies. Because it was a period most of the countries they have come under the influence of globalization. And also in India, policies of our country they have been accordingly geared up, or they have been matched with the trends of globalization, liberalization, and the adoption of new economic policy. And you must be knowing there is also structural adjustment programs, because the financiers like IMF, International Monetary Fund, or World Bank, in order to get assistance from them, you'll have to adjust your own structures and policies. So structural adjustment programs they have been taken up. And also during this period, there is the collapse of Soviet Union. The communist regimes in East Europe, they have fallen. And they are the biggest trading partners of India. And the external debt crisis resulted as the short-term loans taken by Rajiv Gandhi administration. It could not be returned due to failure of the capital goods sector to export. And also the international factors included the conditions, as I have already told you, imposed by IMF and World Bank. It was argued that economic growth and economic efficiency could be achieved with the reduction in the role of the state. Fiscal discipline, access to foreign capital, foreign technology, there were other factors which led to a shift from the state led capitalism to market driven capitalism. So there is a shift from, very importantly, state led capitalism to the market driven capitalism. So market assumes more of importance. There are also other challenges to the success of policies of economic reforms in our country. The Gandhian values that still command influence of other masses are opposed to market economy as they emphasize on groups than individual interest. Profit making was not appreciated. The opposition to the economic reforms by new political elites, failure to insulate the policy making from the populist policies, competitiveness among the states are other obstacles or challenges to the success of the politics of economic reform in our country. So the ongoing neoliberal projects of development based on the processes of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, it has come to be questioned by the advocates of sustainable development, a very well appreciated concept. And the sustainable development strategies, they have been taken up by the new social movements. For example, the environmental movement, questioning the rationale of the prosperity of some social groups at the cost of other constituting majority. So, whatever it may be, within 2-3 minutes, let me conclude because we are coming closer to 7 p.m. The challenges before Indian democracy as of today remain formidable. The identities of caste and religion, that in the democratic idea of their own purpose. And this is despite the fact that social reforms and constitutional law, they have led to the dissolution of the oppressive bonds of caste and the social order. And it is no longer able to make the state redundant as in ancient past. So as the social agenda of Indian democracy weakens due to the policies of economic liberalization, the challenge to the pluralist character of Indian democracy from the ultra-rightist communal forces is coming up in the form of demand to redefine democracy. The economics of liberalization and the politics of empowerment, they are going in opposite direction in contemporary India. So willingness and ability of the Indian state, as in the past, to play mediating role is simply not there. And in such a situation, it is a critical to emphasize the role of the civil society and its citizens, and for the politics of the common goods and rights. It is imperative that Indian states should adopt a strategy of selective globalization, which can enrich the pluralist character of the Indian democracy. So, with this, I end up today's discussion. Thank you for the recent listening, because it's a quite long run, 2 hours, more than 2 hours duration class. So, thank you for your patient listening. So, I am now leaving this platform. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much. Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
God bless all of you. Best of luck.
Thank you, sir.